Dick VanWyk. I was drafted into the Army. Well, I ended up in Vietnam eventually. That was the bad part. I got out of home. I was a shy, innocent farm boy when I went to the service. I mean, I didn't realize how much different the world was when I got away from out of Iowa. I'd only been out of the state a couple times, so I got a draft notice from the county and had to go up and sign up, and they took me in. And say they gave me, well, then they shortly gave me a date to report to Des Moines. Yeah. I was in Lac Vietnam. It was about 40 or 50 miles north of Saigon. 1st Infantry Division, 2nd 28th Battalion, Black Lions. I was in the infantry, and we went out in the jungle on search and destroy missions, looking for the Viet Cong. Well, we got out in the jungle one time. They had just vacated a place, and they built bunkers. And what they did, they'd cut trees down and lay them across. They'd dig a hole in the ground first and lay the trees across there, and they'd lay them crossways the other way, and they'd stack them up sometimes 5 and 6 deep. That's so when an aircraft bomber would bomb them, it wouldn't kill them until if they was in the hole. And it was amazing. After they bomb it, how much damage they did, and people still lived through it. Well, we usually got up in the mornings and eat our breakfast, which was sea rations. That was all in the cans. And the amazing part about that is, just before I come home, our sea rations were getting new enough. They was the same age I was, and I was 21 years old. That's how long they had them stored. Well, in our base camp, it was just a simple shed, and it had a tin roof and screen all the way around it. And there'd probably be about 20 sleeping in every building. If we was out in the jungle, you just throwed your steel pot down, laid your head in your steel pot, took your poncho liner and wrapped it around you so the mosquitoes didn't be, you know. And most of the time we'd dig a hole for protection in case they mortared us or something. October 17, 1967. I had just come back from my first R&R, and my platoon leader, my lieutenant, told me, you've probably been partying pretty hard. And he says, you just stay here and rest up a little bit. And they went out and they marched into a battle. 128 guys went out, 7 come back without a scratch. 58 died that day. 4 more died in the hospital. The rest were all wounded and shipped out. Some of them were pretty close friends. I'd been living with them for 5 or 6 months, you know, for 24/7. You was with them every day, every night, you know. You took turns on guard duty, and you expected everybody to protect each other. And, you know, you get some of them you really liked, and, you know, just like anybody in school or anything, you know, some you liked and some you didn't as well, you know. And 2 of them are still missing in action. And I just, every so often, I sit down and think about them. It took a long time. It only took 48 hours. Everything worked out for me coming home. We got on the plane in Saigon and went to Tokyo and landed. They refueled, and we all had to get out and walk to the hangar and back to get some exercise. Went to Alaska, an air base in Alaska. And they put us in our summer dress uniforms, and we had to run about a half mile to the hangar to get our exercise and back out. And it was in March, so it was terribly cold up there. And I went down to San Francisco and signed out there, and then they shipped us home, and I got on the bus to go to the airport, so I still hadn't had a time to call to tell my folks I was actually coming home. And I flew from San Francisco to Chicago, and from Chicago back to Des Moines, Iowa. And I was sitting next to a guy, and I had my uniform on, and he got to talking to me and asked me where I'd been and stuff. And I said, I mentioned I hadn't got a chance to get to a telephone to call, because, you know, we didn't have cell phones back then. And anyway, he said, well, where you live? And I told him Monroe, Iowa. He said, well, that's not very far from Newton. That's where I'm from. He said, I work for Maytag. I got a company car. Do you need a ride home? Well, yeah, that'll work out. So I showed up about 2 o'clock on an afternoon, and There wasn't nobody home when I got home. My dad was a farmer, so, usually he was around the farm or someplace, or Mom was too, because she didn't work off the farm. And they'd went to town shopping for some groceries, and Mom walked into the kitchen, and I was standing in there, and she dropped all of her groceries on the ground.
And what about your dad's reaction when you got home?
I think that was probably one of the happiest times you ever seen me. Me and Dad never did get along very well. Well, I saw it a few, and I got down in some of them just a little bit. I didn't go very far, because you didn't know what was at the other end or wherever it went out, and they did some elaborate work. I mean, when they dug the walls, they made them smooth. They'd spent a lot of time down there, did you? And I explained to him how they built them bunkers and stuff. And we've been in several areas where, they had probably 15 or 20 of them all built up, and they did it all by hand too. They didn't have fancy equipment. It was, Vietnam at that time was a pretty backward country. If we was walking through the jungle, and some of it was pretty dense, a lot of bamboo in it, which made it hard to walk, and it was always trying to find the easiest place to go. And sometimes it was kind of, we always had to use a compass because, we didn't know the country really well. And a couple places, we had a couple streams that we crossed pretty regular, and it always had a lot of leeches swimming in it. They was probably 3 to 6 inches long. They'd come and swim in, and I don't know how they could find their way in your clothes so fast, but they'd be stuck on you. Bamboo's got vines, and it's got 3 little barbs that stick out like that. Boy, it'll grab right a hold of you and rip your clothes. And then if you get in the right places where there's tree leaves, they pull them together, and there's red ants in there, pretty good sized red ants. And if you bump that, and then if they fell on you, they'd be crawling on your clothes, and the only way to get them off is get your clothes off, because they'd keep a-biting. Well, we was just walking through the jungle, and the one guy come up next to me, and he was supposed to go up and talk to somebody, and so I stepped back a step, and my one foot went in the hole, and there I laid, one foot on the ground, my body on the other side of the hole. Luckily it was just kind of a small hole. I just got just a little scratch here in one leg is all. But the thing is, in little punji pits, they take bamboo and it gets real hard, and they put a point on that, and then they go stick that in feces so you'd get infection quicker. Our base camp actually had a village inside of it. They wasn't actually to come out and into our area, they come out, but they were supposed to be considered South Vietnamese people all the time. But we had a barber that come and give us haircuts, and after I'd probably been there 7 or 8 months, they killed him on an ambush patrol one night because he was out there with the Viet Cong. And he'd been giving everybody haircuts and shaving with a straight razor. And actually, my major infantry training was done in Fort Polk, Louisiana, because there they made us crawl under live fire, 4 or 5 times, You get the idea, you can hear them bullets whizzing over your head. It really makes you. Now, they said they was only a couple feet off the ground when we was crawling, but I think after Vietnam, I think it was a whole lot higher. But Little Vietnam is what they actually called it after we got down there. And it was down in Louisiana, kind of in the swamp country. But I was there in December, January, and February, and it was wet and cold, and it sure wasn't like Vietnam when I got there.
But was the training relevant?
Yeah, somewhat. They give you a general idea of what was going to happen, I guess. And we was all 18, 19 years old, and heck, we're not going to die young. But a lot of them did. Well, the first 3 or 4 times it happened, I was just really scared, I'll be honest. And pretty soon you kind of get them into, well, shit, I could die tomorrow. I better start living. I didn't start drinking beer until I was in Vietnam. They brought 1 can of beer and 1 can of pop out the field if we was out in the field every night. Well, they always put the ice on the beer, so I finally wanted something cold to drink, so I started drinking beer. And I got to drinking beer pretty heavy for a while, especially when I got back home. I had some things I tried to forget about. I would say they need to learn to talk to somebody about what happened. I don't care. I didn't have a reunion with anybody from Vietnam until after 29 years. And my wife even tells me that helped a lot. You know, it was pretty hard dealing with some stuff. You know, I lost a lot of people that I knew, some of them real well. And it just, you know, it made a difference. And we kept having reunions. And actually, the first reunion I went to, my wife, she's a beautician, and she had a state convention she had to go to because she was on the board. So I took my youngest son along, and the four of us met out in Washington, D.C. so we could go see the wall together, which was pretty hard to do too. And we got there, and we was at the motel, and we were supposed to meet at. And one guy come in, and he asked me where the elevators were, and I said, it's around the corner there. He went upstairs to find the other guy because he had his room number, and pretty soon he come back around the corner, and he looked at me, and he says, is that you, Van? I said, yeah, who are you? I knew which ones were coming, but I couldn't really remember. You know, it'd been 29 years. And he said, well, I'm Randy Black. Oh, yeah, you growed a little. And he had, you know, because he weighed about 290 pounds now at this time, you know. So anyway, we went out and drank a little beer that night and had supper. And he said, well, I didn't get a motel room because that motel was full. I said, well, me and the son was in. We got 2 beds in the room. He can sleep with me, and you can have the other bed. And we got upstairs, and we was getting ready for bed, and Randy took his shirt off and got in bed. And my son reached up and touched me, and he says, all them scars on him, are them from gunshot wounds? And well, I said, yeah, didn't you hear that he spent 11 months in the hospital before he got to go home out of Vietnam? Oh, that's all he said. So he was pretty shocked, you know, that, and I mean, he had a lot of scars, you know, so on his back and stomach. They went out on that patrol, I didn't, and I couldn't go out and help them until probably 3 or 4 hours afterwards. And part of that is, what happened that day too is there was a major flying around up above trying to direct some of the battle and stuff. He finally landed it, and he come and got a bunch of us out of the NDP, and we were supposed to go out and help. And he played football when he was in the Army college. Anyway, he took off running way ahead of us. Well, the first thing, you're not supposed to get that far apart, so you got help when something happens. And he got out there, and he was probably a good 100 yards ahead of us, and the sniper shot one shot. All we did was run out there, and finally we drug him all the way back. So that we didn't get to help very much either.
Because you were bringing the major back?
Yep, he was dead that quick. This is a tracing of the Vietnam Wall. This is Lloyd C. Wolford. I first met him in Des Moines when we stood there with our hands raised. He was right beside me. But on June 16, 1967, he got killed in a battle. Him and 2 other guys. It brings back a lot of memories, and it helps you kind of forgive some things, I think. You know, it's really emotional going there. I know 16 names on the wall. So it makes it pretty tough, you know, to know all them guys. There's a lot of nice guys there that some days you wonder why they died for. There's 14 names in here. You probably can't see them, because the names on the wall are listed on the day they died. I don't know how many of you know that, but they are. But there's 14 names here on October that I know. And then plus Lloyd's on a different day, and I got a cousin that was killed over there.